Hey everyone. I'm not quite ready to do a unit video yet, but I heard Roxanne got nerfed today, so I figured I'd talk a little bit about that. Because there seems to be some outrage and some not so much outrage, so I just figured I'd go over my thoughts and exactly why I think this nerf had to actually happen in order for the game to remain healthy. So, I'm just going to start off with the fact that I do not own Roxy. I do not own her. I use her merc all the time, but I do not actually own her. So, I just want to say that my thoughts aren't coming from the perspective of some sore loser who doesn't have Rox, but rather a game balance perspective. And you'll be able to understand exactly where I'm coming from if I explain a couple other things first. So, what's my stance on the Wanderer's hat? Because I I find that a lot of people think that the Wanderer's hat is just a good piece of gear, and I don't think people quite understand just how absolutely broken the Wanderer's hat is. And I have been saying this since day one that I think that the Wanderer's hat is a broken piece of gear. There's plenty of people who will tell you that I've been saying this since day one, and there's plenty of people who disagree with me that it's a broken piece of item. So, let me go over exactly why I think the Wanderer's hat is a broken piece of gear. So, in these games, and I have mentioned this before, there's something called tempo. And tempo is a really, really important thing. So, if you have like a fast tempo in a game like this, it means that you're good at collecting jewels and using a lot of skills. A unit like Black Killer Masa in Japan, the reason that Black Killer Masa is so powerful is her tempo is absolutely insane. She has Berserker Reactive that gives her 20 jewels every time she gets hit, and she has her main kit which has relatively low jewel costs, so she's able to absolutely abuse that reactive and gain an insane tempo, allowing her to launch really high damage attacks really, really fast. Roxy's kit has this in her reactive too, by being able to proc that jewel regen that she has. She gets insane amounts of tempo. She can constantly use some of her highest end attacks. The Berserker itself actually doesn't have a ton of tempo because its best attacks are locked behind like 80 jewel attacks, so they have to get hit like 4 or 5 times before they can actually use anything. So that kind of balances the Berserkers out, but having that jewel reactive on a non-Berserker character that can abuse it really takes them to the next level. And ever since Black Killer Monster was released, she has been the most powerful fire unit in Japan. So what does this have to do with the Wanderer's hat? Because a lot of people's arguments are that the Wanderer's hat, well, it's a one-time thing. You get 20 initial jewels plus whatever bonus jewels you get off of the max jewels, and you get a little bit of HP, and that's all you get. Right? So a lot of people argue that the Wanderer's hat advantage goes away after the first turn of a battle. And to that, I'd have to say they're absolutely wrong. The Wanderer's hat initial jewel advantage will stretch through the entire game, the entire map, as long as you used it properly. And that's because the whole purpose of using the Wanderer's hat is to be able to get a large attack off earlier in order to get rid of a problem unit. So let's say you have a plant, right? And the best way to get rid of your plant is to use a charge up with some kind of ranged AoE, and it'll kill the plant before it can cast Paralyze or Death Sentence or whatever on your entire party. Well, the fact that that plant died faster because you had the Wanderer's hat, and the Wanderer's hat let you do that, has now affected the entire battle. You use the tempo that was gained from the Wanderer's hat to one-up the enemy on the field, and that advantage will persist throughout the entire map. See, the way these tactical RPGs work is that number advantage is a huge thing. Like, you can have the most powerful unit in the game, but if you're up against 100 mid-tier units and you've only got one unit, they will eventually overwhelm you. Being able to even out those numbers as fast as humanly possible is actually a massive, massive advantage in a game like this. It's indescribably large. That's why in Japan, it's very, very, very rare for a piece of gear to give initial jewels, and of the pieces of gear that do give initial jewels, it's normally highly restricted. Unlike the Wanderer's hat that can be used by anyone. And the other reason the Wanderer's hat is such a broken piece of gear is because at least up until now, its HP bonus, it was like the third best HP gear in the game. So not only did it give you this insane amount of tempo, it also gave you some of the best HP you could get on a farmable accessory that anyone could use. It is, by definition, a broken piece of gear. And I don't qualify a broken piece of gear as a piece of gear that literally breaks the game and makes it unplayable, but rather something that allows the game to be played in a manner in which it wasn't designed to be played. And the gear definitely was not supposed to be as powerful as it is, I don't think. I just don't think when Gumi designed it, Gumi SG, that they quite understood just how powerful jewels are. And that became even more apparent when we first saw Roxy's kit. So this is where it comes into Roxy. So the reason why Null Grenade is so stupidly broken is because it allows you to absolutely just delete someone's entirety of their tempo in a single turn. And it's not just one unit, it's a small cross AoE. So you could potentially, not normally, but potentially kill the tempo of 5 units. And on some units, it might not matter much. Like, let's say I had a Roxy versus a Ramses. Well, you can get rid of Ramses' jewels, but Ramses' just going to go up and auto-attack you for like 2.5, 3k damage, and you're going to die anyways. But what if it's a mage? If you null grenade a mage, they become absolutely worthless as a unit on the field. And that's because mages have no good ways of getting their jewels back. See, when a mage runs out of jewels in a map, it's relatively hard to use them after that. I mean, you can still hit things a couple times, but your tempo goes way, way down. You have to like hit 1 or 2 times every single time you want to cast a spell. And mages aren't known to be the fastest units. So that's why you need to be careful about how many skill uses you have and how many jewels you have on a mage. And also why when you see people like on high level maps with mages, you'll sometimes see them just auto a unit out of nowhere, and that's so that way they can get jewels why it's easy to get jewels instead of when they actually need the jewels. So that's the reason why Null Grenade's broken. It's because it absolutely deletes the tempo of something, and also because it could delete the tempo of bosses. So bosses often rely on really high jewel pools in order to make sure that you can't jewel burn them under ordinary methods. Like for instance, in Japan, Tamamo can jewel burn for about 80 jewels in an AoE, but most bosses are going to have like 500 or 600 jewels, so it's not going to be that effective. You need multiple turns in order to actually do that to a boss. And they also have infinite skill casts, and this is to keep the difficulty high. Because if the boss can't attack you, of course it's going to be an easy fight. I mean, we kind of went through this thing in Japan where Bon was coded wrong, so it was possible to reduce a unit's agility to 0. And if your agility is 0, the way the formula works, you just never get another turn. So, while it's not necessarily broken to that degree, being able to make it such that the boss can't use any of its heavy hitting attacks, or it has to hit into a counter, or it has to hit into a guard, really just, it just castrates the boss. It has nothing left to give. And it really made some content way too easy. And we saw how easy it made content. Gumi decided, well, I guess we're going to have to start adding jewel regen to units, just random units in the maps. So what ended up happening is they gave jewel regen to some Chronomancer enemies in a map once, and the Chronomancers started spamming Black Hole, which was never an issue in that map in the Japanese version, but was in the global version, because if you didn't have Roxy, all of a sudden, this map, you have Black Hole spamming upon you, and what do you do with that, you know? I mean, obviously you'd have to bring a Veil, but that should have never been an issue in the first place. Null Grenade is, without a doubt, the most broken skill I've ever seen in this sort of game. Like, literally, it's just pressing a win button, and this was even more apparent in PvP when Roxy could do something like delete a mage's jewels. But, so, let's go over what the new Null Grenade is now, and why I don't think people should be that upset over what they actually got. So, Roxy got a new Null Grenade that eliminates 25% of a unit's jewels. And this is actually a really good idea on Gumi's part. I'm not gonna lie, this is probably the best thing they could have done with what they had, because what a 25% jewel burn means is that any non-mage unit, in PvP, you can still null their entire jewel pool. So like warriors, machinists, just in general, there's a ton of units that start with 25% of their initial jewels. So Roxy can still completely negate their jewels in PvP, no problem, but it prevents her from being able to absolutely delete a mage, because let's just face it, in PvP, if you drop a mage's jewels to 0, that's effectively killing them. So Roxy would basically use Null Grenade, and even if she didn't KO the mage, it was effectively a one-hit KO on that mage, and there was nothing you could do about it. In this new world, with this new Roxy Null Grenade, you won't be able to do that anymore, but Roxy will still be able to be used against like melee matchups and low jewel setups for units that don't have good starting jewels, and you'll still be able to effectively use Null Grenade in that manner. But it also stops her from breaking the boss maps, right? So she will no longer be able to just completely negate a boss, but you can use it for your initial purpose. Gumi stated that Roxy's Null Grenade was designed for PvP, but the problem is it was broken in PvE. And it was kind of broken in PvP too, but not quite to the same extent that it was broken in PvE. So, this is one of those cases where they designed something and they just didn't test it properly. They either didn't know how to test it properly, they didn't understand the skill they were making, whatever the cause is. Null Grenade came out, and I said on day one, this thing needed to be nerfed, and it really did. And I think it became really obvious, because I felt like I saw a lot of people quitting around the time Roxy came out, because it was like, if you don't have Roxy, what's the point of playing? Pretty much all of the EX guides became double Roxy runs. I mean, why use strategy if you can just Null Grenade and just murder everything with an unkillable Roxy? Because, let's just face it, her reactive is broken too. Her auto attack is broken. Her entire kit is broken. To the people who are getting upset over that one nerf to the Null Grenade, you really need to take a step back and look at Roxy as a character. She's still probably the strongest character in Global, bar none. Unless Gerard has his Kaigen, but even then, she's still probably like more useful on a map than Gerard. Her kit is just absolutely bonkers crazy. Like, I couldn't actually believe the kit, and even like a month or two after she came out, like, I was still learning things about her kit that I didn't even realize, and it was like, how on earth did this ever pass muster? Like, I just didn't quite understand how exactly anyone could design a unit that was this broken. So, anyways, to make a long story short, I don't think Roxy's nerf was really going to affect her that much. It'll affect your PvE a little bit, but that's about the extent of it. As for the refund, anyone who got the refund, well, they're luckier than me, because I never got Roxy, I never got any refunds. I think that Gumi handled it the appropriate way. To the people who want their shards back, you've been enjoying this Roxy Advantage for months and months and months, where you could just steamroll content just because of how absolutely broken Roxy was. I really don't think that you should be complaining that much, because a lot of other people who didn't get Roxy have been kind of struggling in events and other content just for not having her. And especially because they made updates to some maps in order to make it more difficult for Roxy users that made it even more difficult for non-Roxy users. For the people who are complaining about the paid gems becoming non-paid gems, so I think this is a little bit more of a legitimate concern, but I do still think that you enjoyed Roxy for a very long time. She's only been slightly nerfed. She's still an absolutely insane unit, and I don't think the paid banners ever had her guaranteed anyways. And really, it's just one of those things where it's like, it's hard for me to look at someone who's complaining about this. Like, if you spend like hundreds of dollars on a unit in a gacha game, I just question where your priorities are, if you know what I mean. I mean, don't get me wrong. Back when I played another game called Blade and Soul, I wasn't like a whale, but I was definitely a heavier spender than I probably should have been. And having the best gear and being ahead of the curve feels great. And looking back, I probably should not have spent as much money as I did. But for the time, it felt like it made sense because I was working insane hours, and in order to keep up, it just felt like it was like a good thing to do. But as it stands now, when I look back, like, all those advantages were only temporary to begin with. Like, if you relax even a little bit, you're eventually going to get outscaled. So, like, if you go back to the old Roxy pools, you've had this for months and months and months, and now you're getting gems back in the mail. So, while it is kind of upsetting to see this conversion happen like this, I do think it is still overreacting a little bit. Gumi really didn't do a bait and switch here. It's online games constantly get nerfs and buffs to units. Gacha games, not as often, but in this particular case, I do think it was necessary in order for the health and balance of the game, because let's just face it, like, a lot of people just gave up in Arena because they didn't have Roxy, and it was so hard to counter her. And on some maps, it was nearly impossible to counter her. So, let's just see where this goes. Roxy will be getting Kaigened in the future, and she's going to become even more of a monster once she gets a massive HP pool. So, let's just wait and see here. If you're really still upset about this a month from now, then by all means, like, just do whatever you want to do. But just let the initial rage pass a little bit, and let's just see where this takes us. I do think this is healthier for the game, and hopefully Gumi will have learned from their lesson and never make such an absolutely stupid skill as No Grenade in the future. A lot of their Magna Historia units mess with jewels, and it seems to be a system they don't fully comprehend. So we can only hope that they just stop messing with jewels in their Magna Historia units, and instead just focus on the skills themselves. So, I've probably rambled for an insane amount of time. As you've seen in the background here, I'm currently working on Tina's Job Plus, because she just got her Job Plus in Kaigen in Japan. I will have a video out in the next day or two on that Job Plus, along with probably another video or two for Kaigen units. So look forward to that. Once again, this isn't one of my normal videos. I just thought I'd give my 2 cents on this because it is kind of an inflammatory topic, and I feel like people need to just calm down a little bit. Even a lot of Roxy users have been okay with this, to my knowledge, just because a lot of people understood just how absolutely broken No Grenade was. So, anyways, guys, if you actually made it this long, thanks for listening to me ramble for a little bit. Hopefully I'll get this Tina Job Plus video out soon. Tina's one of my favorite MCs, and it's good to see her finally getting some love, even if it's not as much love as I would like. So, I will see you next time, and thanks for watching as always.